Buenas tardes, muchas gracias por acompañarnos a esta tan esperada conversación en el programa de conversaciones de Z ONAMACO de este año. La charla va a ser en inglés, pero bueno, voy ahorita a comentarles quién es cada quien en español. Nos acompañan en esta ocasión Magalí Arriola, directora del Museo Tamayo, Rory Padeken, curador Vicki and Logan del Denver Art Museum, Roberta Tenconi, curadora de Hangar Bicocca Milano, Eugenio Viola, curador jefe del Museo de Arte Moderno de Bogotá, MAMBO, y Modera, Juan Canela, director artístico de Z ONAMACO y también curador en jefe del MAC Panamá. Queremos agradecer específicamente a la Embajada de Italia y al Denver Art Museum por su apoyo también para poder llevar a cabo esta conversación. Muchísimas gracias por estar aquí. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Gracias, Elo. Thank you, everybody, for being here today. I want to thank you all for being here and accept the invitation of this talk. The idea is to have a conversation around some topics and subjects related with what it means to work as a curator in an art institution nowadays. In these days where we have been living crisis after pandemic, after war, after crisis, what are we doing? How are we working in our institutions? So we will share some experiences and thoughts about these issues. So I would like to start giving you the opportunity to present yourself and present your institutions, so we can have a better idea of who you are and where you work. So maybe we can start with Rory.
I'm first in line. I'm Rory Padeken, the Vicki and Kent Logan Curator of Modern and Contemporary Art at the Denver Art Museum in Colorado, the United States. I've been in my position for 7 months, so I'm very new to both the institution and to the state of Colorado itself. I was previously in California at the San Jose Museum of Art for about a decade or so. But at the Denver Art Museum, I lead the Department of Modern and Contemporary Art, which comprises some 8,000 works from 1900 to the present. The museum itself is organized into 12 collecting areas with 10 curatorial departments, and we collect basically globally from around the world. We have a 2-building campus right in downtown Denver, spanning almost 400,000 square feet. So I'm not sure what that is in meters. And the collection in total is over 70,000 works of art. So we are one of the largest institutions in the Mountain West region of the United States, and at least the top 10 in the U.S. in terms of both our size and also the audiences that that visit the museum. We also have one of the finest collections of Latin American and ancient art of the Americas in the world. And my colleagues who lead that department are very knowledgeable. Jorge Rivas was here earlier on this stage on Thursday. But I'm very much brand new to my institution, so I'm still learning about my collection, though a reinstallation of our modern and contemporary art galleries, which span 2 floors of some 15,000 square feet, I think that's 1,500 square meters, will be presented in May of this year. I've only had 8 weeks to put together a checklist, so it will be very much a surprise to me, as it will be to all of our patrons that come to visit. But that's a bit about our institution, I guess. Yeah.
Thanks everyone for being here and for the invitation, first of all. I come from a very different institution. It's a private foundation in Milano. It's called Pirelli Hangar Bicocca, and in the name there's all the I mean, it explains itself what the institution is about. So Pirelli first, because it's a foundation founded completely by Pirelli. So we don't get any public money, and but the aim of the institution is really perceived as a public museum in Milan, especially because there's not a public contemporary art museum in the city. We then Bicocca is the name of the neighborhood where the institution is, which is in the north of Milano, almost at the border. Milano is relatively small. The back of our institution is already another town, of course, of the hinterland. But it was originally it was a leisure place. There's ancient villas, but in the beginning of last century it became one of the biggest industrial area in Europe. And this is what came the Hangar, because Hangar was a factory for trains and locomotives, so not owned by Pirelli. And this is really affects what we do, because it's a huge, massive building. The ceiling are maybe higher than this in the main gallery, which is of course a challenge for the artists, but also a lot of fun and pleasure to work with. We are not a collecting institution, so we don't collect, but we produce. We try to produce always works for art. We have 2 galleries. In one, it's always about solo exhibitions, solo shows. So there's one gallery which is for more younger emerging voices, while in the major gallery, the one that is big as this, it's more established artists. But we work in the same way. The building is still, it's a place full of memory. It was, as I said, a production factory, and now we produce something else, which is culture. At least this is what we want. The public is very broad. The entrance is granted for free. So we really welcome lots of visitors and it's very mixed, from schools, families, practitioners in the art world, but also people from the neighborhood. So it's very mixed, and we try to give access to everyone. So we work a lot with cultural mediators. There's a small booklet, which is about 30 pages, so not that small, that is given to everyone, but then the visit is very, very free. So we try to give, inputs, but then there's this feeling of not feeling intimidated from contemporary art, which I think it's really important. And yeah, I guess that's it.
Buenas tardes a todos, todas y todos. My name is Eugenio Viola, and I'm the chief curator of del Museo de Arte Moderno de Bogotá, el MAMBO, which is a leading Colombian institution devoted to contemporary art. It was founded 60 years ago. We are celebrating the 60th anniversary this year by the Argentinian art critic Marta Trava. It's located since 1976 in a brutalist building made by Rogelio Salmona, who was a celebrated Colombian architect of the 70s. I'm working there since 2019. They are almost 4 years. We usually present between 12 and 15 exhibitions per year between Colombian, Latin American, and broader international artists. We have a collection of almost 5,000 pieces between mainly Colombian and Latin American modernists, and more broader international artists as well.
Gracias, Juan, y gracias a todos por la invitación. So my name is Magalí Arriola, and I am director of Museo Tamayo in Mexico City, which you probably all know or have visited today, like this week. So as you may know, Museo Tamayo was founded by Rufino Tamayo in 1981, and since its inception, it was really conceived as a place to display international contemporary art. This is probably related to Tamayo's own biography. As you are probably aware, he was one of the 4th great muralists of this country, with Orozco, Rivera, and Siqueiros. But as opposed to the former three, he had a very strong international agenda. Whereas Rivera, Orozco, and Siqueiros were doing like a much more politically engaged art, like in public space with muralism and all of this. Tamayo really made a point of constructing a career for himself as an international artist, and this was also accompanied, I would say, by the creation of a collection that would somehow kind of create a context or like a contextual frame for his own practice. So the Museo Tamayo originally opened, as I said, in 1981 with a core collection of almost 300 works, amongst which we have like great names such as Wilfredo Lam, Francis Bacon, Max Ernst, and then a few other like Mexican artists. And since then the collection has grown. Now we have over 800 works. And so I've been there since 2019, and of course, like as Juan said, it's been like a difficult path because of the pandemic and like many other, like reasons. As many other institutions, we've had like important budget cuts. So we rely a lot on, as we're a government institution, we rely a lot on our foundation, which is like really the entity that help us like fundraise money, and that's like through like the institution through where we can like apply to different grants. So it's not only like let's say like our board of trustees that support us, which is like a very actually like a big board, and we're like really like trying to make it growth. Also trying to bring in like much younger patrons and collectors, and this is with a very specific end, which is trying to build like a culture of philanthropy in Mexico, which I think is not something that is very ingrained in this context. So we really want to try to, like strengthen that part. And then like everything, all the money that we fundraise is not only used for like exhibition programming, but also public programming, and like in some cases also to pay for certain salaries in order to support like the inside infrastructure. So, and I would say that I'm also acting as chief curator right now. So really what I'm trying to do is to, of course, like honor the collection, and through that Tamayo's own work and practice, but also try to bring in like an international program, which is what Tamayo himself wanted, in dialogue with like the Mexican art scene, not only Mexican artists, but artists living in Mexico, and really try to create a dialogue that can, like enrich in the whole scene.
Thank you all for your presentations. Following this, what you were saying, Magalí, I want to ask you, how do you decide your programs? How do you build up your programs? How do you decide what artists are you working with and why? This for thinking in each institution, its nature and the context. No, you were saying inviting international artists in contact, putting them in dialogue with Mexican context. No? So, if you can develop a bit, how do you decide the program you are doing and why? Yeah.
So, as I said, I started in 2019. So, and then 2020, the pandemic started, and we were forced to close. And then we entered like a renovation phase of the museum, which means that we remained closed almost 2 years, a little bit less than 2 years. So I'm still, like kind of dealing with some of the prior program, like the program that was established by the prior administration. The exhibition of Tania Perez Cordova, for example, that is now, that was already on the program when I took the museum in. But, like just, it was just her name who was on the program, but there wasn't a show, like a properly created show. So we took it from there, and Tania is a very close, like artist and friend and somebody with whom I've worked, and I totally, like believe that she really deserved this show. So I'm trying to mix at this point, like some of those projects that were still there with some others that I wanted to do and that kind of makes sense contextually, like again, trying to not just place like artist exhibitions, like one after the other, but really try to create a dialogue among the different shows that we have, and really trying to follow like a lead, like a kind of transversal development of the program, in which we have, I guess, like 3 main themes, which are probably out there, like, and many other institutions are following this lead, which are, of course, like gender issues and environment, which would be the second one, and a third one, which is like very particular, I would say, to this context, to the Mexican context, and like a very specific interest of mine, childhood, in the sense that I really believe that, like we need to, like at least in Mexico, like I think one of the most fragile and like generations are the generation of kids, like for many reasons, for political reasons, for social reasons. We have, like, as you know, so many deaths and disappearance. I think like this is gonna leave like a big generation of kids that no one is gonna really take care of, that probably our institutions are not like really looking into that. So that's something that really, like I have at heart. And again, this doesn't mean that I'm using that as a theme, nor the gender issue, nor the environment as a, like as a topical way to construct exhibitions, but rather as like transversal discourses which can build from show to show. So last year, for example, we presented an exhibition of Julio Galán, who is a Mexican artist that worked for a long time in New York. He was part of Andy Warhol's clique, a painter. I think, of course, that painting is coming back, and it's been having like an enormous relevance, but I was also interested in his work because he was, like contextualized as an artist of neo-Mexicanismo, and I think, like his work meant much more than that. Starting with the fact that he was really dealing with issues of gender, and that wasn't, his work was never framed like that originally, so I thought that it was important to reframe his practice and really address, like these issues of travestism, like sexual digression, all of these. And at the same time, I think that another very important topic in his work was childhood, and how this actually, like the topic of childhood can relate to gender issues too. So I've been trying, like to construct like this kind of arguments, and always, like one show in dialogue with the next one, and of course not only important for the local context, but also for the international scene.
As you were properly saying, art is a matter of context. So we usually select the artist and the program according to the emergencies that we can have in the Colombian context, but of course they can even resonate with an international context, as Magalí was saying. For example, my first project when I arrived there was a Mexican artist, Teresa Margolles. It was a project highly controversial about the migratory emergency with Venezuela. It was titled Estorbo, and was for me a kind of statement on my way of dealing with art. And of course we had to fill a lot of gaps, also connected with the Colombian socio-political context, as you can imagine. So we are trying to work as a community-centered institution, and also because art is to create bridges, basically, instead of borders, especially in a society full of contradiction and problems as the Colombian society connected to the Colombian context. Or, for example, the next project that we are presenting is a survey show of the Colombian Carlos Motta. But we're doing, we built, thanks to a grant of the Mellon Foundation, the first multimedia archive about the history of the HIV in Colombia, from the 80s till now. We usually try to balance between Colombian, we work on 3 different Colombian, Latin American, and broadly international artists. So we usually present every year at least a Latin American artist, at least an artist is coming from another area, it is not Latin America, but whose work can in a way resonate, of course, with the Colombian context. And regarding the Colombian artists, we usually present, we usually give the biggest opportunity to an artist, a middle career artist. We usually present, you know, a young artist and an historical artist that has to be reconsidered. For example, we did an exhibition of Colombian Alejandro Obregón. Alejandro Obregón is one of the most important Colombian modernist artists. For the first time in all the history of his exhibition's history, about only his works on paper, for example. Or another important initiative that we launched was the first, in partnership with Julius Baer, the first prize in Latin America devoted to women artists. It's by invitation, and the first edition was won by Chilean Voluspa Harpa. It was about the violent social unrest that happened in Chile and unfortunately in Colombia. That is a project is still traveling, is opening in March at GAM in Santiago in Chile, and on 14th of July at Moontref in Buenos Aires. And actually the second edition is an Argentinian artist based here in Mexico City, Ana Gallardo.
So the way we choose artists, it always comes from a lot of research. I have to say we don't have specific topic, but we work the other way. So the topics and the themes come from the artists themselves. So we believe we are more like a radar, very receptive to see what's around, both on an international level and local Italian level. And then, of course, there's many of the main urgent topics of today, like, I mean, environment, post-colonialism, gender, but it's always come from the artist. So we never start from a specific theme. This is why we work with artists on long terms. So we announce the program every 2 years, and usually the invitation is to an artist is minimum 2 years, but usually even 3 or 4 years before the actual date of the realization, because it takes really that time, usually minimum 2 years, to come up with the right project. Because both galleries are like an undivided space of 5,000 square meter, the bigger one, and 1,500 square meter, the smaller one, and they are undivided. And we don't build walls or partitions, so it should really be the right project. And especially for the major gallery, it's not for every artist. It can kill the work of many artists. But on the other way, it's also a challenge. So one of the last show was with Steve McQueen, so film and video, and very particular and specific on sound. And imagine it's like this all. And he loved that invitation because we always try to say something new. So when we invite an artist, it's also what is needed for the artist at that moment, and what is needed for the public. At the moment, we have a big show of Bruce Nauman. It's a retrospective in collaboration with Tate and Stedelijk. And at Tate and Stedelijk was a completely different show. In our space, the show became a specific focus on corridors and rooms, because our space allowed us to build all these corridors and rooms, and it was really a specific work that was overlooked in Nauman practice, though he had millions of retrospective and important exhibition, but it was the first time that all this specific corpus of work was there. So it's kind of it comes from the place to be receptive from where we are, and also to pay attention to what's around and what is important for the public. And then we always try to get Italian artists as well. There's less opportunity for Italian artists. I think we are private, but it's one of the, if not the biggest, one of the biggest place in Italy for young Italian artists to practice and engage beside the Italian pavilion. And usually there's like a gap. You start from small galleries, and then you have the Italian pavilion, which is massive. So there's not really a gym before for younger voices, and we try always to also work with Italian artists.
So my institution is very different. It's an encyclopedic institution, so it's not just modern and contemporary. I also can't give you specifics on how I select artists for the Denver Art Museum because I haven't done that yet, because I just started. But what I can say is that because we're a global institution and we serve broad audiences, our program must be well balanced in terms of the kinds of art that we're showing across time. So we may show Monet or Picasso, but then we also may do a focus show within our Latin American galleries to invite a contemporary artist to intervene into the collection, for instance, which will happen in May of this year. We may also rely on our collection heavily. As I mentioned earlier, we have more than 70,000 pieces, and that's a lot of material culture from which curators, and there are 12 of us in various departments, can mine endlessly for inspiration, for research, for collecting of more works from across time that will enrich and tell new and different stories. So it's a bit different in terms of how we program. We also have spaces in the museum in which we invite artists and the communities in which we serve to come together to create site-specific works of art. A project that I'm working on will appear this summer. We also have quarterly programs in which artists take over the museum. And these are artists that are not just visual, they're performing, they're musicians, they're spoken word poets, they're dancers, choreographers, etc. That can also intervene into the museum to riff off of the exhibitions that we are showing, whether it's something from Greek antiquity, or Dutch Flemish painting, which we just recently had on view. So we also have to think about our visitors and about the communities in which we're not reaching in Colorado specifically. We have a great deal of minority populations that are just not coming to the museum. And so we constantly think as a curatorial team what kinds of work or experiences, and I think it really does come down to experiences, because people don't know, generally speaking, about art historical movements if you're thinking about broad audiences. So what are the kinds of experiences that we want to create for people that are uniquely different than an experience in which they cannot have outside of the museum? And so we work holistically with our exhibitions team to come up with an installation design that you'll never see anywhere else in the world. And it has partly to do with our architecture. We have a Gio Ponti design building, his only building that he designed in the United States. And we also have a Daniel Libeskind building with those crazy angular walls that will drive any curator of modern and contemporary art crazy. But the architecture does allow us to do something really unique with those spaces. So, not Gio Ponti. He's lovely.
Rory, I will keep thinking a bit about the publics, and you mentioned some communities that are not coming to the museum. I don't know, how do you work with public programming, educational programs in terms of engage with those communities that historically has been away from the museum? I don't know if you have something.
Well, what I can say is, since this panel is post-pandemic, and what we've dealt and what we've learned from it, is that I think audiences still expect there to be some kind of online programming. And I'm only speaking within the American context because that's all I know. And it's because of access. People might not have access to the museum when we're open. So that's also another thing to think about. Maybe we need to be open more, and at the times in which people are not working or not going to school. But I also think that people can engage in multiple ways with a program or a work of art. A work of art can also exist online. It can be a performance that's watched, right, virtually, and not in real time. And I also think that museums have to think about what can they uniquely offer that an artist can't do by themselves on YouTube, on their TikTok, on social media. So what is the museum as a platform in which it could reach globally? For instance, it could reach other organizations that are not visual arts institutions, right? And to invite them into the museum space. Maybe you love dance or the symphony, but you never thought that you could see yourself in a museum, for instance. But what if the program is an opera singer singing in the galleries? These are not like mind-blowingly, innovative programs. But I think you get the sense that in order to kind of engage with a public that's not coming, then you might need to offer something that they would engage with in the first place.
Same question. So public, it's essential. Since Duchamp was saying art as a father and a mother, so without public, it doesn't even exist. So it's fundamental to us, but on the other hand, when we conceive an exhibition and work on an exhibition, we never start from the public thinking this is something that should be easy, feasible for them. It's rather the opposite, where we want to kind of give an experience which is inspiring, but maybe even provocative or disturbing, or something that is not necessarily something that is more unknown. Then we give we try to give lots of instrument. So beside the guide, we have cultural mediator in the exhibition, and it's really a dialogic. They are not there to explain. I mean, if you ask, they will explain everything, but the idea is more that you talk and the interpretation comes from the public. So, and whatever you think, you feel, it's fine, because it's your reading, your reaction to the exhibition. And then, of course, we work a lot with the educational department, with schools, that is the public of tomorrow, but also especially with teachers. There's a program there's really like a school for teachers of high school and primary school, because it's then the teachers or the professor that bring the children, the students. So we start from there, trying to kind of give the opportunity also to talk about contemporary art in school, which is really not a topic in Italy. It's hardly modern art, and certainly not contemporary art. And then we also have a public program that is very open. We work a lot with music, performance, so many, it's very interdisciplinary with many languages, and these obviously attract a lot of also a different public. And then there's also something we can never predict, but like talking about the current exhibition, the Naumann exhibition, which is very, a conceptual artist, very strong and harsh work, and it's getting an incredible success with teenagers, which we would have never, ever imagine. And Saturday and Sunday, we had 3,000 people really queuing to access. It's because of the selfie also. That's something that when he conceived the corridors at the end of the 60s, he could never expect. But it's fine, because they come for that, and we hope then they get the experience of, they discover something else, they enter the work. There's, the entry point, it's personal for everyone. So we try to work really horizontally and locally, to get as much people as possible.
We usually tailor our educational and public program according to the visual programs that we are developing, of course. We usually try also to involve the vulnerable populations with activations and like the LGBTQ plus community. We have been working a lot, for example, with la Red Comunitaria Trans in Bogotá, porque Colombia is the second country with the highest, after Brazil, if I remember well, crimes against LGBTQ plus population. We also work in collaboration with schools, universities, and among the multiple activities that the museum does in terms of the education and the public program, for example, we have this activity that is called the MAMBO Viajero, the traveling MAMBO. It's a kind of Duchampian boîte and valise with some abstract of our exhibition that are traveling in the most sensitive and vulnerable areas of the region, and sometimes when we have the funding of the country.
I don't think I have much more to add. There's like many overlaps, no, for like with our programs.
Yeah.
But again, I think it's very important to, as you were saying, to like really keep a very tight relationship between like all the programs we do with the exhibitions. And that, again, since I was speaking earlier on about Julio Galán, for example, we really got like a huge community of, you know, like trans people also coming to the museum who really felt represented probably for the first time. And we start building from there, you know, with workshops, conferences, that kind of thing. Of course, social media are very important. Same thing with kids, you know, like we try to reach out to different institutions, like with smaller kids. We have an editorial committee of boys and girls between like 8 years old and 13 years old who are actively producing content for our website and inviting, you know, like other kids to participate. So it's really about, you know, like creating like a very kind of organic way of producing, adding this to the fact that we're in the middle of the park, so we have, you know, like it's also kind of easy to have people enter the museum, but at the same time we also notice that you know, like sometimes people just go and walk their dog, but they wouldn't feel like welcome into the museum. So it's really about, you know, like creating these kind of links. So maybe you remember at some point we did a program that involved specifically people with dogs who could come and enter the museum to walk their dog, and that was like hugely successful. So it's really, you know, like a way of kind of unpacking and deploying these kind of relationships into many directions, and there's going to be overlaps, of course, at some point. So that helps to create like a sense of community, and I think that's like really very important, to create a sense of community so that people can identify, you know, like maybe with one show, maybe not the other, but then they will come back with a third show. So, but really, again, I think community is really like a clue into this.
I think we can open the conversation, so if any of you have a question, you can do it. I don't know if someone have a question. If not, I have more. No questions? Okay. Yeah.
Just say one word. What is the challenge of the museum in the future?
If I knew what the future is, I would probably have an answer, but it's very difficult. I feel, no, like seriously, I feel it. There's like some very big changes in the making, but I don't have a clue of what there are. You know, like, and definitely the institution is changing in many ways, but then there's like many things that won't change and they shouldn't change. You know, like, and this is also, of course, you know, like very different for place like ours to Hangar Bicocca, who doesn't have a collection, no? And of course, you know, like the collection, as we know, are at the core of museums. And you need, first of all, you know, like take care of that. There's like issues of conservation, etc., which tend to make the institution very monolithic. But I think that's a given. So we just need to see, you know, like, and this has been done, you know, like by many important museums in many interesting ways, you know, like how to activate collections, how to do like re-readings, recontextualize them, like the whole decolonial problem, of course, has been very present lately, and that has impact into other areas of you know, like programming and all of this. But I don't know, I wish I knew, but definitely there's like so many inertias that are being questioned that I think it's a very interesting moment for institutions. Not an easy one, but interesting.
Some thoughts about the future?
About the future is very difficult because yes, the institutions are always evolving according to the society, no? For example, even all the importance that nowadays the social media has, for example, in the role of the institutions, and now we have departments that are developed accordingly to that. When I started my institutional career, we did not have, for example, a department connected with the social media development of the museum. So hopefully the museums will continue to mirror and to challenge our contemporary societies.
I just want to add that maybe something that would be essential to take care of in the future, but also in the present, is like freedom for the institution. It's, I speak from the lucky position of a private foundation, but during the pandemic, we've seen how weak certain institutions have been because they relied on the entrance ticket. And the moment there were no entrance ticket, it was really a problem. And if you rely only on tickets, then you don't have freedom. So I think that, I don't have the answer, so maybe this is the challenge, but it's important to be able to be free, not to count on, museums are politicals, but they are not about politics, and they should not depend on politics. So I guess it's really try hard to struggle for freedom for the artists, freedom for the public, and find a way also to get sustainable without, which is, I don't have the answer, but I think that's really a point to avoid the weakness that we have seen in the last 2 years.
I totally agree with you. I wish we were a private foundation too. So my answer to you would be funding, and specifically from future patrons of the arts. I think it's a different generation that will come into being in the future, and they're different than their previous and their parents' generation or their grandparents' generation, where there was a sense of giving to the arts, of legacy giving, of collections, of acquisitions, endowments to keep the place and the lights on and moving. So that's definitely changing. And I was previously in Silicon Valley, which was a different kind of giving, and they weren't giving to the arts. You know, they give to healthcare. They give to things that they can recognize immediately as making an impact. So, at least within our context in America, that's definitely something to be aware of. Also, collection storage for institutions that collect.
Can you talk about next gen funding? What it will take to bring that next generation on board?
That's a really hard question that I don't have the answers to. But I think we have to find different reasons for, say, the next generation, say, the grandchildren of those that of grandparents that gave, that they're not interested in, you know, having their names on the walls, right? They're not interested in being feted at galas. So we have to find different reasons. We have to give them different opportunities that only the museum can. Maybe it's connections with other like-minded people. Maybe it's introducing them to artists who are doing really innovative things in the world that have that can have potentially a great social impact. So it's less about the name recognition and being splashed everywhere on the museum collateral, but something that has maybe more deeper resonance. Yeah.
Mine is not so much a question as a comment of the transitions that have happened at the Denver Art Museum. And whenever any talk, any presentation is announced at the Denver Art Museum, we now are well aware of the Native American land that we sit on, and that the honored in everything that the Art Museum is doing. Oh, okay, and the Denver Art Museum has made, I mean, we've been involved for a really long time, from when we would just go on free days when we couldn't afford it, and over time. And the Art Museum is becoming more and more aware of the community and creating opportunities for everyone. And because of social media, when there are free days, when there are special events for different neighborhoods, because we're a pretty eclectic state and city. But it's just, I'm just so impressed of how much we're respecting the land that the museum sits on. Want to add to that?
Thank you. Any more last?
Well, thank you very much. It has been really interesting listening to quite different experiences, private institutions, public institutions in countries as different as the US, Mexico, and Colombia. It is fascinating seen from outside the profession of being art curator. One curiosity, what is the biggest constraint that you have to face in terms of limit to your freedom of deciding what the institution you work for does? I mean, don't say anything that might endanger your present job. I mean, it's just your professional experience, not the present job. I mean, what do you think it has been the biggest limit to your freedom of planning the cultural activity you work for, of the institution you work for?
There are actually many. You know, like I would say there's literally like no strings attached to my position, so I can do absolutely anything I want to do. it's really not about that. It's really not about, you know, like any kind of neither censorship or, you know, like discourses, limits, nothing like that, really. It's more about time, money, and infrastructure, like really, which is a lot. I have a very small team, so that means I have to do a lot, they have to do a lot. I rely very much at this point on external creators. So we do much more like coordination work, and this is something I really like, not only because I can bring, you know, like other minds to the museum, so it's not like always the same conversation going on, or always the same people talking or thinking, but really establishing a dialogue, you know, like with the outside. And on the other side, that's also, I think it's a very privileged position also for my team to be able to be in dialogue with curators from other institutions or other countries. So I think that's something I enjoy. Myself, I would love to do much more curating job, you know, like that's really something I miss. I miss a lot reading, I miss a lot writing, I miss a lot researching and curating, but it's simply impossible, you know, like I don't have time to do all of that. So I do very little like creating small shows, or maybe like a bigger show, but in the longer term. But it's, you know, like you lose one to get the other, so.
Hi. It's maybe my question is related to what you were saying, but I'm an artist, and I'm curious to know about your relationship as curators with the artists that you work with. Sometimes, as an artist, I feel that like the curator is not taking in consideration my point of view. Like they have their own discourses, and so sometimes it's not something that goes very smoothly between artists and curators.
I don't really have an answer to that. I think it depends. It's like a very personal relationship. It depends on each curator. I've never worked with you for sure, but I've worked with many artists, and the way I do it, and I think there's like as many ways of curating as there are curators, as there are artists. You know, like there's not one way of curating at all, or writing, or thinking. So, like from my point of view and in my experience, I always like to work a lot in dialogue with the artists. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense. But
it's a continuous dialogue, because basically we have the same interest to express, to show at the best the artist's work. Of course, it's different case by case, but ideally there is always a complete collaboration, cooperation, almost a complicity between the curator and the artist. So if I'm inviting if I'm working with an artist, theoretically I'm in love with his work. It's almost a kind of lover discourse between the curator and the artist's work. Ideally, of course.
Well, I can just add that, I mean, there's different style of curating. To me personally, it's really, if we think of the origin of the word, which is from Latin, take care. So like curare, prendersi cura, to take care. So to me, the curator is who facilitate and make the artist, the art in the best position to express. And then, of course, there's the personal input of inviting a specific artist. Then we, of course, go back to the affinities we share. But, I mean, it should be, the art comes from the artist, not from the curator. I know there's also different style, but, yeah, not mine.
I mean, I couldn't agree more. with what they said. So I'm sorry that was your experience.
So try a different curator.
Okay, so if we don't have any last urgent question, I think we can leave it here. Thank you very much, the four of you, for your time and to share your experiences. And thank you all for being here. Thank you.